Hello and welcome to Transform Tuesday. I'm Dave McCormick, VP of Product Management here at Alpha Software, and I'm pleased to be joined today by Sarah Mitchell, our Director of Customer Success. Today on Transform Tuesday, we're going to be continuing our topic of the UnSubmit events, and specifically the UnSubmit event that you use if you would like to submit data from your Transform forms into a SQL database. Now, there are a couple reasons, you might want to do something like this. And so, for example, let's imagine that you have a form on a phone or a tablet, and you want to fill out that form, and you do want to save it back to the Transform server. But let's say there's some pieces of information in there that you might want to add to a SQL database, or maybe you want to save all the information to a SQL database. For example, let's say you are collecting on a single form some information about people, maybe about the houses that they live in, and some other things. You might want to actually take that data, which you're going to use in Transform, but you might want to use it someplace else, like in a SQL database. And you could pass that data into multiple tables and take just the information that you need and put it into SQL. So today I'm going to show you how that's done. It's pretty easy, and we're going to do it using, well, let me show you what you can use, and I'll show you what we're going to use. Your options for SQL databases aren't just SQL Server, but there's, besides SQL Server, SQLite. There's also Oracle, MariaDB, MySQL, and basically all of the ones that you see here listed on the screen, you can use as your SQL store. In other words, this is where you can put the information. So in many cases, you'll probably already have something like this set up, but today we're going to actually set one up anyway, and we're going to do it using the Alpha Cloud database. Now, I've talked about Alpha Cloud maybe a little bit, and I've certainly talked about Alpha Anywhere, and I've talked about Alpha Anywhere over the last several sessions. Alpha Anywhere is a companion product to Alpha Transform, and it can be used to set up the UnSubmit events and a few other things to configure Transform to get it to the way you would like it. In the future, we're going to start moving that functionality out of Alpha Anywhere and into Alpha Transform. But as of today, the way you do it is still in Alpha Anywhere. If you don't have Alpha Anywhere, you can get a free copy over at alphasoftware.com. You'll download the Community Edition, which is free to use, and you can do everything you see here today, except for one thing, and I'll point that out, but it's not critical. So let's just dive into a live demo. And before we do that, there's one thing I want to point out actually, which is that Alpha Cloud is a service that you use with Alpha Anywhere. So Alpha Cloud is where you would host an application that you built in Alpha Anywhere if you were to build an application there. One of the features of Alpha Cloud is that it comes with some test databases that you can use. You actually get up to 3 test databases, one for each of the kinds. There's MariaDB is allowed, Postgres, and I think SQL Server is the third one. And we'll go take a look at that. I'd also like to remind you that during today's session, you could, of course, ask questions, and you could type those questions into the questions box of the GoToWebinar control panel. I see that someone says, oh, they can only see my Transform splash screen. Oh, that's interesting. Let's see what's happening here with sharing. Oh, yep. You sure can. Hang on a second. I'm going to do that again so that you can see the different types. All right, everyone, take 2. Welcome to Alpha Transform. So here's all these cool graphics. Let me just show them to you. Hopefully they're showing now. So this is submitting Transform data to SQL databases, is what we're talking about today. And the types of databases that you can send them to. Here's our little cloud diagram showing you you're here on the filler. You're going to pass information to the server, and that can get passed down into a SQL database. Next screen is the list. The next screen is the list of the different types of SQL databases that are supported. So they're right here on this list. So hey, thanks for pointing that out, because that would have been bad if I went through the whole presentation without you seeing my screen. Also, feel free, like I said, to ask questions by typing questions into the GoToWebinar control panel's question box. Let's pop over to a live demo right now. So I'm going to go over into Remote Desktop. And we're going to start not here in Alpha, but we're going to start here in Alpha Transform. Now, last week, I created a form called the inspection form, and it had only two fields in it, the item that was being inspected and whether or not that item was operational or not. Obviously, in real life, a real inspection form could be very long, detailed, multi-part, but this is all we need for today's demonstration. Now, when I submit this, when I click the submit button on my phone or in the web form filler, I want that data to not only be stored in Transform, but I want it to go into a SQL data store. So let's take a look how we would do that. I'm going to pop over here to Alpha Anywhere, and we're going to go, and the first thing we're going to do is we're actually going to build what's called a connection string. A connection string is going to allow Alpha to talk to our database. And because each database speaks a little bit differently, each connection string is a little bit different. So they're set up specific to specific databases. We do that by launching Alpha Anywhere and going to the Web Projects control panel. We go up to Tools, and then from Tools, we go into Alpha DAO connection strings. What we're going to do here, I already have a couple of connection strings. For you, this will be blank if this is the first time you've done this. And I'm going to click New to create a new connection string, and I'm going to call this another connection string. You might want to name it after your database or something. Give it a better name than that, but this is good for our demonstration. And then I'm going to click Build. And here are the choices that I have for SQL right here. But I have one more choice, which is the Alpha Cloud SQL API. And if I click on that, if I choose that here and I click OK, it gives me a little dialog box, which is actually really helpful because if you wanted to see exactly step by step of how to set it up, we actually have a video that you can watch right here. It's like a 1-minute video. I'm going to show you exactly what the steps are, so we don't have to watch that video, but this is very helpful if later on you forget how to do this. So I'm going to click Close, and we're going to give it a moment, and up pops my Managed Subscription Database Services screen. And I'm already here in this screen because I've entered in my username and password earlier to get into Alpha Cloud. Another way you can get to this screen, and actually I'm going to cancel out. Another way you can get to this screen is by going to Alpha Cloud, going into Advanced, and then the last option there is Subscription Test Databases. Again, they'll take you to the same place, and if you have to log in, you'll be prompted for your username and password. When you first get to this dialog box, it's going to be blank. I have already set one up, so mine isn't blank, but here's how you set up another one. You just simply go to Actions, and you say Create Server, which I've already done. And when the server is created, it gives you an option of 3 different types of servers: MariaDB, Postgres. Oh, let me click it, I'll show you. Postgres and SQL Server. Now notice MariaDB is missing from my drop-down box. That's because I've already created a MariaDB database. I'm only allowed one. That's your limit for the Alpha Cloud Test Databases. So just keep that in mind. Of course, you can have multiple tables in the one database. That's no problem at all. So after that was set up, I then went and I created a database server. Actually, let's try it with SQL Server. I'm not going to get that far because I don't have a SQL Server connection string. But I want to show you what the dialog box looks like at least. It says, okay, I've created SQL Server. And I'm going to say Actions, create a database for that SQL Server. And then the database to create is, call it my database. I'll click Create Databases. It's going to say, I'm about to create a database. Are you sure? Yes, I am. Unable to, whoops. Oh, that's not good. Sorry about that. Normally this works fine. Let me just report that as an issue later. As you can see though, oh, it looks like it may have set it up, but it's just not active. I'm going to go ahead and delete that out of my account, which I can do here again from that Actions menu. Maybe not. So MariaDB is the one that I've set up, and by clicking on my MariaDB option and I'm going into Actions, I can say Get Connection String, and the connection string is what I need in Alpha Anywhere. Now there's 2 things I could do. I can actually just copy this to the clipboard. I could go back into Alpha Anywhere, open up the Alpha DAO connection strings dialog box, click New, and paste in that string. but we've saved you all that hassle. You can just go ahead and say save as name connection string, and we'll do all the work for you. So I'm going to click that, and all I have to do is give my connection a name. So I'm going to call this another connection, and I'm going to click save. Let's hit it saved. And you don't see the, I noticed before that if you launch this from the alpha GAO connection strings dialog box, you don't see your new connection right away until you close this and open it up again. So I've essentially done that by opening up this dialog box. And there's my another connection string. So I have that one. I have one called cloud test that basically point to the same place. And I'm going to close that. And then I'm going to go and create my OnSubmit event. So if you already had a SQL Server, if you already had the SQL Server database set up, you wouldn't have to do any of those steps. And again, this works with any SQL Server database. Just make sure that you've got the firewall open so that the Alpha server can talk to it. So I'm going to go ahead and go to Tools, More, Transform Utilities, and then On-Device Data Builder for Transform Applications. So that's the one that we were using before. We're going to use this builder for Transform OnSubmit Events. So I'm here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to fetch the definition of my OnSubmit events from my Transform account. And I've entered in my API key previously. I've shown you how to do this in the last 2 sessions, so I'm not going to go into great detail here. And you'll see I already have a OnSubmit action called Send to SQL Database. I'm going to redefine this and show you how I set it up. So I'm going to say Add Action. I'm going to say Send to SQL Database. Click OK. And then I'm going to say Edit Actions. And this is where we need to choose a specific form. Now, some actions can work across all forms, like send an SMS, send an email, something like that. The SQL database is not one of those. You need to define it. You need to specify exactly which form you're going to be using if you want to save the data from that form into a SQL database. So I'm going to click in here, and because I've entered my API key, it's already there. I'm going to click Select. We're going to scroll down, and we're going to grab that inspection form that we built last week. And I'm going to click OK. And now what I want to do is define sample data. That's so that I can test this out here without having to actually open up Transform and test it that way. And so to do that, all I have to do is select a instance ID, and I click Select. There is only, well, actually, I've got 2 records in this database here. This one and this one. And it doesn't matter which one. I'm going to choose that one. That's fine. And now I'm going to click OK, and I've got my sample data now all set up. Now for condition, I could say I only want to enter in SQL into my SQL database under a certain condition, but I'm going to say that we're going to do it for everything. So I can just leave that one blank. That's not a problem. Description is optional. I'm not exactly sure. Oh, that's a description that'll appear on the other side. So you may, if you're going to do a bunch of SQL CRUD operations, you might want to say like this adds the name to the customer table or something like that. In other words, let yourself know what you set this up to do. The next thing we're going to do is choose the SQL database connection string. And I'm going to click on that. And because I've already created a connection string, I can import that connection string right here. And to do that, I'm just going to use this import properties from an alpha anywhere connection string. And I'm going to choose cloud test. I could have used other connection, but cloud test is fine. And I'm going to click OK, and you'll see it's filled in all my information here. Now, the next thing I want to do is I want to define a table. Okay. And it's going to ask me, should I refresh what's coming from the server? That's always a good idea. And what the schema is that it's pulling in is it's pulling in the schema for the form, for the TT inspection form. And if you click on it, I have a couple of choices. Now, in my database, I already have a database set up, I believe, right here, called TT inspection. I do. But let's say I didn't, because that will probably be the case. Well, it might be. If you're going to an existing database, then you can simply choose your database here. There are the fields, and that's fine. If you want to create a new database, we let you do that too. So you could say, or a new table, you can click create table, click that. And basically you want to, I think metadata fields are unchecked by default, but if you do check them, it means that they will be inserted. So the metadata, whereas things like form status, created by, things like that, those could be all added into the table. So once that's all done, and you hit create, it creates that table. I'm not going to do that here. And then with the field map is basically lets you decide how you're going to take, in other words, what fields do you want to get from the TT inspection form, and how do you want to map them to the SQL form? If they have the same field names, that's ideal. And if you've created it, like I showed you a second ago, they will have the same field names. So the field map is actually really easy to set up. I'm going to show you one that's already set up just to give you an idea of what it looks like. It's this one here. I'm going to say edit action. And under field map, I'm going to click field map. Again, it doesn't hurt to refresh. It only takes a second, so there's no harm. And I click top. And then I say I want to include all my metadata fields. And basically at this point, I am done. I can just go ahead and click OK. There's some instructions here, though, if your fields are named something different. So you can say, my fname field from my transform is actually called, first name in my SQL table field. So if that's the case, you can put equals in. So if item, for example, was something other than item in my SQL thing, like let's call it, product number or something like that, or product description, product name, that's where you would put that. I'm not gonna bother doing that, so because it's all set up for me anyway. I'm gonna go ahead and hit cancel. I'm gonna cancel out of this. And what I want to do is I want to test this action because it is already set up for me. So I'm going to test this action, and I'm going to choose some form data, and here I can choose an instance. So let's choose this one here. There we go. That's the sample data that it's going to send. And actually, I can change this. I can say even more items. And now I'm going to click OK. And I'm going to say test. And I should get back a little box in a moment, which said the operation completed successfully. It took 4.9 seconds to enter that record. That's a very long time to put a record into SQL. That's why these are really just test databases. They really probably don't have the performance that you want. They might, but usually it's quicker than that. I'm going to go ahead and click close. And now I'm going to show you something. We're going to pop over here to Control Panel. You're not going to have this option if you're running the Community Edition. I had mentioned this before, that there was something you couldn't do. But if you have the full version of Alpha Anywhere, you can use it to work directly with SQL databases. I think actually in here we have something like that too, a Database Explorer. Let's use that instead. So we'll say Database Explorer. And I'm going to say I want to add a table, and I'm going to add Cloud Test as my connection to my viewer. And under tables, there's that table TT inspection that Alpha built for us. And there are all the fields in it. And I believe I can just double click on this, sorry, right click on this and say show data in table. And then it'll open up a little wizard. And here are my two things. Even more items was the record that I updated. It didn't add a new record because it already had the same form instance ID. And there's the previous one, the thingamabob. So this doesn't just insert records, it also will update them if it's the same form instance ID. So you won't get duplicate forms in there, which is pretty handy. All right, so that's that when it comes to setting things up. The only other thing I want to point out to you is when you're setting one of these up, you might sometimes want to have, fetch definition. Let's say you wanted to take the data from a single form, but split it into multiple tables. So my example at the very beginning was, let's say you had a form and it had information, say, about a person, But let's say it also had information about the thing you were servicing. Like, so here's the owner information, and that might go into the customer table. But the, say the machinery or whatever that you're working on for that customer might want to go into another table called machinery or items or something like that. So how do you split it across? It's actually really simple. All you do is you define a different action. So for each action, you can write to one table. So what you would do is for the first action, you'd write to the customer table. And for the second action, you'd write to the items table. So the question is, so you can, I'm reading here through the questions here. What permissions do I need to grant my API key to use the OnSubmit builder again? That's a great question. I tend to use all, but I don't think you have to here. I think that it would be sufficient to do read only in this case as a key. Let me clarify what I'm saying. I'm going to go over to here. If I go into the Home tab and I say I want to get an API key here in Transform Central, these are the different types of permissions your API key can have. Can I get to on-device assets? Can I edit on-submit events? You're going to need to have this one definitely set. And I suspect you're going to need to have read data, but it may do that automatically. And of course, you can always just use all for all scopes if you want to do it that way. But do make sure though that if you're being specific that you do choose the edit on submit events. Otherwise, Alpha Anywhere won't be able to get into your Alpha Transform account to define those on submit events for you. Excellent. So do we have any other questions today? Oh, there's that ad that someone said, oh, could you hide this? I didn't realize that. Sorry about that. It was hidden behind my GoToWebinar control panel. Any questions today? It appears not. Excellent. Well, remember, you can always send questions to tfservice@alphasoftware.com. Thanks very much for showing up. Thank you, Sarah, for being here, and hope to see you at our next Tuesday webinar. Until then, take care and stay well. Bye-bye.